I watched my 8-year-old grandson get lifted clean off the floor by the collar of his own sweater. 3 feet, 4 feet, high enough that his little legs left the ground completely, kicking wild in the air, his face going red because he couldn't breathe. But the most horrifying part wasn't the man doing it. It was everyone else in that room. My daughter-in-law stood frozen, staring down at her plate. And my son, the boy's own father, just bent down, picked up the fork he'd dropped, and went back to eating like nothing was happening. That was the moment I understood a truth I should have seen years earlier. Monsters don't always shout. Sometimes they wear a suit, sit at the dinner table with you, call you family, and take it for granted that you'll just stay silent forever. He lifted that boy calmly. Calm, like a man straightening a crooked picture frame on the wall. That's the part nobody believes when I tell it. 2 years have passed since that night, but every time I close my eyes, I still see my grandson hanging there in midair, and I still remember exactly how it felt in the moment I made the decision that would change the lives of this entire family. Because the man choking the childhood out of my grandson had no idea he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Just as my son had no idea that the old father he'd always looked down on had spent 33 years hunting down the kind of people who destroy other people's lives, and had never once let a single one of them escape the consequences. My name is Walter Briggs. I'm 69 years old. I live alone in a brick house in Pleasant Ridge, on the east side of Cincinnati, and I drive a 2009 Mercury with a dent in the rear quarter panel I've never bothered to fix. I shop at the Kroger on Montgomery Road on Wednesday mornings. When it's quiet, my knees crack when I kneel. My hands shake a little when I'm tired. To my son's wife, and to her parents especially, I was exactly what I appeared to be. A tired old man on a pension. Harmless. They had no idea. For 33 years, I worked as a forensic accountant for the Department of Justice, out of the field office downtown on Walnut Street. White-collar crime. Embezzlement, wire fraud, the kind of theft that wears a tie and never raises its voice. I retired 4 years ago with 2 letters of commendation in a drawer and a phone full of numbers that still get answered on the first ring. But I never told my son any of the details, and I'll explain why later, because the why matters more than you'd think. His name is Daniel. He's 38. When he was a boy, he used to follow me around the garage, handing me the wrong wrench and grinning like he'd done something brilliant. He had the kind of laugh that filled a room. I hadn't heard that laugh in about 3 years when the text came. It was a Thursday in late October. I was out front bagging leaves, and my phone buzzed against my hip. The message wasn't from Daniel. It was from his wife, Renata. Dinner Sunday, 4 p.m., our place. Cole keeps asking about you. That was the whole thing. No warmth in it, like a receipt. But that name, Cole. I hadn't seen my grandson in almost half a year. He'd turned 8 in July, and I hadn't been invited, hadn't even gotten a call. I'd mailed him a birthday card with 2 $20 bills folded inside, and a drawing I'd done myself of a little rowboat on a lake, because the last time I saw him, he'd told me he wanted to learn to fish. The card came back to me 11 days later. Return to sender, in Renata's handwriting, pressed so hard the pen had torn the envelope. I never told Daniel about that. Some things you just fold up and put away. I texted back that I'd be there. I asked if I should bring anything. She didn't answer. Sunday came gray and low, the kind of Ohio sky that smells like somebody's fireplace and never quite decides to rain. I drove out to Indian Hill, where they live now, where the houses sit back from the road behind long driveways and the lawns look vacuumed. Renata's father had paid for that house. His name was Garrett Maddox, and he owned a string of luxury car dealerships out along the highway. 4 of them. He made very sure you knew it was 4. I parked my dented Mercury at the curb because the driveway was already a showroom. Renata's white Audi. Daniel's tired old Honda, sagging in the middle of all of it. A black Escalade. A silver convertible with the top up against the cold. I sat there a minute looking at all that polished metal, and I'll be honest with you, I almost laughed out loud. Because 30 years ago I'd helped send a man to a federal prison for buying cars exactly like those, with money he'd skimmed out of a teacher's retirement fund. The world has a sense of humor. It just doesn't always tell you the joke until later. Renata opened the door in an apron over a sweater that cost more than my monthly groceries. She gave me a smile that stopped at her cheekbones and never reached her eyes. "You're early," she said. I was 3 minutes early. I offered to wait in the car. She sighed and waved me in. The house smelled like rosemary and new carpet. And then a small body came around the corner at a dead run and slammed into my legs. And a voice said, "Grandpa, you came, you really came," and every expensive thing in that house disappeared. I got down on the floor. My knees popped like a string of firecrackers, and I didn't care. I held him. He smelled like green apple shampoo. And he was lighter than I remembered, thinner, his wrists too small. There was a bruise on his forearm gone, the yellow-green of an old one. I felt it before I saw it. "Course I came, bud," I said into his hair. "Always." Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway. My son. Tall, but folded somehow, like a man apologizing for the space his own shoulders took up. He lifted one hand. "Hey, Dad." That was all we managed before the room changed temperature. Garrett Maddox walked in holding a glass of bourbon, and it was 3 in the afternoon. Big man. Barrel chest, silver hair swept back, a face flushed the permanent red of a man who'd decided long ago that he was always right. Behind him came his wife, Lorraine, small and sharp, her hair lacquered into a helmet, a strand of pearls running through her fingers like she was counting sins on them. "Well, look who made it," Garrett said, looking me up and down the way you'd appraise a trade-in. "Daniel, get your old man a drink. He looks like he could use one." I said I was fine. He dropped himself into the good armchair, the one I happened to know Daniel had saved for and bought, and he said, "So, you finally quit working. What was it you did again? Some little government desk thing?" "Accounting," I said. "Accounting." He stretched the word out like it had a bad taste. "Bean counting." "Well, somebody's got to sharpen the pencils." He winked at Lorraine. "Me. I built something. 4 locations. 51 people on payroll. You ever wonder what that's like, Daniel? Building something with your own 2 hands?" Daniel looked at the carpet. "And I want to stop right here, because this is the first place I have to be honest with you about what was happening inside me. I have interrogated men who skimmed millions and never blinked. I have sat across a table from people capable of genuinely terrible things and kept my voice flat and pleasant. So when Garrett Maddox called me a pencil sharpener in my own son's living room, I could have ended him with 3 sentences and a phone number. I want you to understand I had that. It was right there in my pocket." I said nothing. I smiled. Because here's what 33 years teaches you. People show you exactly who they are the moment they decide you don't matter. And a man showing you who he is, when he thinks no one is keeping score, is a man handing you evidence. So I didn't argue with Garrett. I filed him. I'd been filing him for 3 years. We sat down to dinner. They put Cole between his mother and his grandmother. They put me at the far end by the door, the seat you give the guest you'd rather not have. Garrett took the head of the table like a coronation. The food looked like a magazine and tasted like nothing. I chewed and I nodded and I watched. Garrett started in on Daniel again. "My son ran the floor at a logistics company out by the airport, 9 years, good benefits, steady. He could be pulling triple that working sales for me." Garrett told the table, not Daniel, the table. "Closing deals. Real money. But he won't. You know why?" He pointed his fork at my son. "Soft." His daddy raised him soft. Lorraine laughed her small, dry laugh. Renata looked at her plate and smiled at it. If you have ever sat at a table while someone slowly dismantled a person you love, and smiled while they did it, and watched everyone else smile too because the alternative was conflict, then you already know the specific loneliness of that room. You know how loud your own silence gets. You know how you start to feel complicit just by staying in your chair. Cole was swinging his legs the way 8-year-olds do. His foot bumped the table leg. Garrett's bourbon trembled, and a single drop, one drop, slid over the rim and onto the white tablecloth. The room stopped. What did I say about kicking? Garrett's voice had dropped into something flat. Cole went rigid. "Sorry, Grandpa Garrett. Sorry, sorry, sorry." "Sorry doesn't unspill it," Garrett said, and told the boy to come around the table. Daniel said low, "He didn't mean to," and there was a hairline crack of resistance in it, the first I'd heard. Garrett didn't even look at him. "I'm talking to my grandson." Cole looked at his mother. His mother looked at her plate. He slid out of his chair and walked the length of that table with his shoulders already climbing toward his ears. And I swear to you, I have watched grown men walk into interrogation rooms exactly that way. An 8-year-old should not know how to walk that way. No child should ever learn that walk. What happened next took maybe 4 seconds. I've spent 2 years inside those 4 seconds. Garrett took a fistful of Cole's blue sweater. He stood, and he lifted, and that boy came off the floor. His feet ran on nothing. Then Garrett took 2 steps and put him into the dining room wall. There was a thud, then a smaller, sharper crack from inside the plaster. Then a sound came out of Cole that I can only describe as a balloon when you let the neck go, a thin, high, terrible whistle of all his air leaving at once. "You don't kick at my table," Garrett said. Calm. He set the boy down, and Cole slid down the wall and folded onto the floor, and began to cry the deep way, the way where a child can't find the bottom of his own breath. Lorraine cut another bite of chicken. "Good," she said. "He needs to learn it sometime." And Renata, my daughter-in-law, said, "Thank you, Daddy." And Daniel stood up halfway, white in the face, his hands shaking on the edge of the table. He looked at his wife. He looked at her father. He looked at his son on the floor. And then he sat back down. He sat back down, and he picked up his fork. "I will not let you hate my son for that. I won't. I didn't understand it that night either, but I understand it now, and I'll tell you what I came to understand later in this story. But in that single moment, the only thing that kept me in my own chair was a cold piece of math. If I moved wrong, if I roared the way every cell in my body wanted to roar, Cole would pay for it after I left. When I wasn't there to see, so I did the hardest thing I have ever done at a dinner table. I set down my fork. I folded my napkin into a neat square. I stood, and I said, very pleasantly, "Pardon me. I need to find the restroom." Garrett waved me off, already easing back into his chair like a king after the deed. Down the hall, left side, old-timer. Try not to fall in. I want to be honest with you because this channel is the one place I tell the whole truth. Walking down that hallway, away from my grandson crying on the floor, was the worst walk of my life. Every father instinct I have was screaming at me to turn around and put that man through his own wall, but rage is loud and loud loses. I'd spent a career proving that. So I went into the bathroom, and I locked the door, and I sat on the cold edge of the tub, and I took out my phone, and I called a number I hadn't dialed in 3 years. Hamilton County, Major Crimes, Sergeant Okafor. A half-second of silence. Then his whole voice changed. "Walter? Walter? Is that you?" "Marcus," I said. "I need a unit at 1140 Drake Ridge Road, Indian Hill. Right now, I'm a witness to a felony assault on a minor. Boy's 8 years old. The suspect's an adult male, 6'2", 220, drinking. He picked the child up by the shirt and threw him into a wall. Cracked the plaster. The boy couldn't breathe for the better part of a minute. The mother and the grandmother were both present, and one of them just thanked the man who did it. I'm in the house. I'm not in danger. The child needs an ambulance. Jesus. We're rolling. Say the address again. I gave it to him. Walter, are you recording? Audio since I came in here. I've got a clean sight line to the dining room from the hall corner. I'll get video for the rest. One more thing, Marcus. The man's name is Garrett Maddox. He owns Maddox Auto. Make a courtesy call to the Indian Hill Chief and to the prosecutor's office. This one is going to get loud, and I want the right people watching before it does. Already on it, boss. 6 minutes out. I hung up. I ran cold water and pressed it to my face. I looked at the old man in the mirror, the thin hair, the tired eyes, and I said, quietly, "I'm sorry, Cole. I'm sorry I let it get this far." Then I opened the camera, started recording, and walked back down the hall with the phone held loose against my hip. Cole was back in his chair. His eyes were swollen, a red mark blooming on his cheekbone, his collar stretched out of shape. He was eating green beans one at a time, mechanical, the way a child eats when he's learned that an empty plate is the price of being left alone. That image will be with me until I die. All better now, Garrett said, and laughed, and went right back to lecturing Daniel about real money and closing deals, and how hockey was for rich kids and Canadians and football would toughen the boy up. God knew somebody needed to. I kept the camera angled at my hip. I kept eating. I kept the boy in the corner of my eye. And then the doorbell rang. Renata frowned. "We're not expecting anyone." Garrett told her it was probably somebody selling religion and to send them off. She got up, smoothing her apron, and I heard the front door open, and I heard her breath catch hard in her throat, and I heard a man's voice, level and clear, say, "Ma'am, Hamilton County Sheriff. We had a report of an injured child at this address. We're coming inside. There's no injured child here. This is a family dinner. Ma'am, step aside, please." 2 deputies came through the front hall. Behind them was a man of about 56, gray at the temples, in a plain dark jacket, and the second I saw him, something in my chest came loose. Marcus Okafor. 25 years ago, he'd been a brand new investigator, and I'd helped him build the first fraud case of his career. Taught him how to read a falsified ledger like a confession. Behind him came a paramedic with a bag. Garrett rose half out of his chair. "What in the hell is this?" Marcus crossed straight to Cole and went down on one knee. "Hey buddy," he said, soft as anything. "My name's Marcus. I'm a police officer. My friend here's going to take a quick look at you, okay? Just to make sure you're all right." The paramedic crouched. Cole looked at his mother. And for the first time all afternoon, Renata's face wasn't smiling at her plate. It was afraid. "This is harassment," Garrett boomed, rising to his full height. "This is private property. You can't walk into my daughter's home. I'll have your badges, every one of you." "Sir, sit down," one of the deputies said. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Marcus stood up slowly. He looked at Garrett. Then he looked down the table at me, and the smallest nod passed between us, and I watched his face register something far past simple recognition. It was relief. The exact look a young officer gives an old one when the cavalry finally walks through the door. He'd been the young one once. "Mr. Maddox," Marcus said, even and unbothered, "we're here on a call from a witness inside this home, reporting a felony assault on a child. I need you to stay seated." "A witness? What witness?" Marcus turned to me. "Sir, can you confirm what you reported on the phone?" I set my fork down. I wiped my mouth with my napkin and folded it once more. I looked at Garrett Maddox straight down the length of his beautiful table. "My name is Walter Brenneman," I said. "I'm Cole's grandfather. About 20 minutes ago, in this room, I watched Mr. Maddox take this child by the collar, lift him off the floor, and throw him into that wall." I pointed. There was the dent, and the hairline crack running up out of it. The boy couldn't breathe for roughly 40 seconds afterward. Mrs. Maddox said aloud that it was good for him. My daughter-in-law thanked the man who did it. The child has visible marks consistent with the impact, and I have it recorded. Garrett's face had gone from red to purple to a strange waxy gray. You called the police. At my dinner. You were a guest at your daughter's dinner," Marcus said quietly, "and it was never your call to make. And who the hell are you to take this dried-up little pencil pusher's word over mine? My word against some retiree who counts." "Mr. Maddox." Marcus's jaw tightened, and for the first time his voice had an edge. "This man is Walter Brenneman. He spent 33 years as a senior forensic investigator with the Department of Justice. He has testified in more federal cases than you've sold cars. He trained me when I was 26 years old. So when he calls me and tells me what he watched happen in this room, I believe him before he finishes the sentence." The room went absolutely silent. Renata was staring at me like she'd never once seen me before. Lorraine's fingers had stopped moving on her pearls. And Daniel, my son, was looking at me with his mouth slightly open and something rising up behind his eyes that I hadn't seen in years. It looked like a man waking up out of a long sleep. The paramedic looked up. "Sir, I want this little guy at Children's for x-rays. He's tender along the upper spine, and his pupils aren't even. Could be nothing. Could be something." "He's fine," Renata snapped. "Don't touch him. He doesn't need a hospital." "Ma'am," Marcus said, "with respect, that isn't only your decision. The boy's father is right here." And Daniel looked up. His palms were flat on the table like a man bracing against an earthquake only he could feel. He stood, slowly. "Take him," he said. His voice broke clean in half. "Take my son to the hospital. I'm riding with him." "Daniel," Renata's voice cracked. "Don't you dare." "You said thank you." He turned and looked at his wife, and I watched something in him finally hold its ground. "He threw our son into a wall, and you said thank you to your father." She started to speak, and he was already moving. "I'm coming with him," he told the paramedic. They wrapped Cole in a foil blanket and walked him toward the door. And as he passed me, he reached out one small hand and touched mine. "Grandpa," he whispered, "are you coming too?" "Right behind you, bud," I said. "I promise." Garrett Maddox was arrested at his daughter's dining table at 5:41 on a Sunday evening in October. He was charged with felonious assault and endangering a child. They cuffed him with his napkin still tucked into his collar. Lorraine wasn't arrested that night, but she got a long, cold lecture about Ohio's mandatory reporting laws and the promise of a visit from Children's Services. Renata sat at that table after everyone left and cried, loudly. I did not stay to comfort her. I drove to the hospital, and I sat with my son. Cole had a hairline fracture of the C2 vertebra, high up the neck. The doctor used the words a few millimeters either way, and let them hang there, and Daniel put his face in his hands and made a sound I had never heard a grown man make. I put my arm around him. He was shaking. Dad, he said into his palms. Dad, I sat there. He was on the floor and I picked up my fork. I know, son. Who are you? Lieutenant, the officer said you trained him. He said the DOJ. Dad, who are you? I leaned back in that hard plastic chair, under the buzzing light, the vending machine humming in the corner, and I thought about how to answer. I'm your father, I said. That's all I am. Everything else was just a job I used to have. I never told you the details because I never wanted you introducing me at parties as your dad, the federal agent. I wanted to be your dad, the boring guy with the dented mercury. He laughed, wet and broken. You're not boring. I'm extremely boring. That's the whole trick, Daniel. People decide you're nothing, and then they stop performing for you, and that's exactly when they show you everything. Then I told him the thing I most needed him to hear. You got him out tonight. You froze, and then you stood up. The measure of a man was never whether he freezes once. It's whether he gets up the next time. You got up. The next morning I made some calls. I won't dress it up. I called a family law attorney named Diane Ferraro, who'd spent 20 years as a federal prosecutor before she got tired of cartels and decided she'd rather, in her words, take apart bad people in custody court. When I told her the story, she went quiet, and then she said, Walter, bring me the file by Wednesday. I'm going to enjoy this. And I called an old friend named Saul Kleinman, who'd spent 2 decades auditing car dealerships for the IRS Criminal Division. I didn't ask him to do anything. I asked him, as one private citizen to another, whether in his professional judgment a particular business might have anything in its books that a concerned person ought to know about. He laughed and said, You haven't lost a step. Give me 4 days. I wasn't in a hurry. 33 years taught me one quiet, reliable truth. Men who throw children into walls do not file honest tax returns. Men who need to dominate every room they enter do not run clean books. There is always a bill for being a bully, and the IRS is endlessly patient about collecting it. Saul called back in 9 days. Maddox Auto had been running salvage and flood title cars through a shell company, washing the titles and selling them as clean. 6 years of it. Over $1 million in income that never met a tax form, structured cash deposits, the whole catalog, and the registered agent on the shell company, the name on every piece of paper, was Lorraine Maddox. Not a bystander, a partner. I sat on my back porch in the November cold after that call, and I felt no joy. I want to be clear about that, because I think people imagine this part feels good. It doesn't. What I felt was the cold, flat certainty you get when you finally find the leak that's been dripping behind a wall for months. You don't celebrate. You just stop hearing the drip. A concerned, anonymous citizen filed a tip with the IRS, and a separate note went to the state, and a quiet heads-up to a friend in consumer protection. That's all I'll say about that. The criminal case moved fast because the evidence was a wall. My video, the medical records, the cracked plaster, photographed by the deputies, Cole's interview with a child specialist. Garrett's lawyer wanted a plea. The prosecutor wanted a trial and a public conviction, and she got both. Meanwhile, inside of 6 weeks, Garrett got a letter from the IRS Criminal Division, then a letter suspending all 4 dealer licenses, then a call from the bank pulling his floor financing because suspended licenses void the loan. In 1 week, he went from a man out on bail to a man whose entire kingdom was frozen and whose wife was under her own investigation. He never understood what hit him. He called Daniel once, screaming that your father did this, and my son said, very quietly, I don't think he did anything, Garrett. I think you did, and hung up. The jury was out 2 hours. Guilty, every count. The judge gave him 5 years, 3 before any chance of parole. And from the bench she said this was not 2 adults in a conflict. This was a grown man 3 times, a child's size, lifting that child like a thing, and throwing him at a wall hard enough to break his neck, and then sitting down to finish his meal, and that she found it not merely criminal but contemptible. They let him out in cuffs. He never once looked at me. Renata filed for divorce expecting Daniel to fold. She met Diane Ferraro instead. By Christmas, Daniel had emergency custody. By February, he had full custody, with supervised visits for Renata only after she completed a violence counseling program. She never completed it. Now let me tell you the thing I promised about my son and the fork, because this is the lesson I most want you to carry out of here. What I came to understand is that Daniel didn't freeze because he was weak. He froze because he'd spent years inside a house that taught him his job was to keep the peace at any price. That conflict was the most dangerous thing in the world. That's what abuse does. It isn't only the violence. It's the slow rewiring of a good person until standing up feels more dangerous than watching harm. The mistake most of us make is thinking courage is loud. It isn't. Courage is the quiet record you build over decades of doing the small right thing when nobody is watching, until the day it's finally tested and you find, to your own surprise, that the record holds. So here's the one thing I'd ask you to actually do tonight, not someday. Find the quiet person in your own life, the one who gets talked over, the one everybody's decided is harmless, or boring, or small, and tell them you see them. Just that. Because the loudest man in the room is almost always the most afraid, and the quietest one has usually been keeping score his whole life. And here's the question I want you to sit with after you close this. If it had been your table, would you have stood up while everyone else stayed seated? Be honest with yourself. It's harder than it sounds. Cole is 10 now. He sleeps through the night. He laughs out loud at his cartoons, the same big laugh his father used to have. He's got a best friend named Owen, and they ride bikes until dark, and he plays hockey, not football, because he asked his dad if he could, and his dad said yes. We went fishing last spring up at a lake in Michigan, and he caught a 14-inch trout and held it up grinning with a tooth missing, and that photo sits framed on my mantle right now. So before I let you go tonight, I want to hear from you, because I read every single comment, and I mean that. Tell me in the comments. Comment 1 if you think I was right to stay calm and play the long game. Comment 2 if you think I should have stood up at that table the second it happened. Or comment 3 if you honestly don't know what you'd have done in my shoes. There's no wrong answer. I've gone back and forth myself. And tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight, and what time it is where you are, because it always amazes me how far these stories travel. And if you've ever sat at a table, or in an office, or in a family, where someone looked right through you and decided you didn't matter, tell me about it. I'd like to know I'm not the only one. If this story meant something to you, do me a small favor and subscribe, so the next one finds its way to you. I'm just an old man on a porch with a dog and a dented car, telling you the things I wish somebody had told me. Take care of each other out there, and take special care of the small ones. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Cincinnati to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.